Welcome to the Pick of the Flow show. I'm Selwa, and today my guest is Doug Henwood. Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I recognize that music.
You actually played it.
I did. I think I did. Yes.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on the show. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I really am a fan of your music.
Wow. Likewise, I'm a fan of your show, and yeah, it's an honor. So the tradition of this show is to let the guests introduce themselves. Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah. Okay. My name is Doug Henwood. I am an economic journalist. I've been writing and broadcasting about economics and politics for, oh my God, 38 years, I guess, or something like that. Yeah. And I did a newsletter for many years. I've had a radio show for almost 30. So yeah, I've been at this writing and talking thing for quite a while. It was lonely at first, having a left-wing political perspective. It's become somewhat less lonely these days. Still feel like I'm pushing against the dominant grain, but it does seem a little less lonely.
Yeah, I love your show, and I think like to think of like all the projects you. I mean, yeah, we'll delve into like more in depth, but sorry. I would love to like delve into your childhood first, because I think it's so inspiring to like step back and see like how like what led you to start you know, the newsletter and now the show.
Well, my childhood, I grew up. I'm pretty old, and I grew up back in the golden age of America. You know, the time that Donald Trump wants to go back to, when America was allegedly great. It was. You know, it was comfortable. I grew up in a suburb in New Jersey. My parents had been lived in urban Hudson County, New Jersey. They moved to the suburbs like many did after World War II. They were classically upwardly mobile Americans of that period, and I found, you know, suburban life kind of dull and cramped, and I was really happy to get out of there and go to an urban college and get an experience of city life, and then come to New York City, which is just a very different feel from suburban New Jersey. But a couple of things I thought were valuable out of my childhood. It was comfortable. I was, you know, an only child. I have no siblings, so my social development might have been hindered by that. But my mother was really interested in music. She tried to teach me piano. That didn't go very well, just because I think, you know, mother-child things got in the way. But I mean, she did really. I think that's where my interest in music came from, and you know, that's lasted my whole life. And she played the piano herself fairly well, although she stopped when she had a kid, and. But you know, there's all this Bach sheet music lying around, so I grew up surrounded by that stuff, and you know that's really had a lasting effect on me.
Oh, wow.
But I was my father was an accountant, and so I guess I got kind of interested in numbers that way, and my mother was much more interested in music and literature. Well, she constantly complained about the suburban housewife, the constraints of the suburban housewife life. And I think, you know, I kind of mixed those two in my personality for the rest of my life, the mix of interest in music and literature on one side and money and numbers on the other. And they've gone back and forth between, or tried to combine the two. But that's been kind of the constants in my life.
Mm-hmm. And so what were your aspirations at the time?
Well, but I guess when I first developed aspirations, insofar I had any, was I wanted to be a writer, and then maybe then when I got to college, I thought it would be fun to be an English professor. So that was what I thought. When I got to college, actually, I was divided between being an economics major and an English major. I was a conservative in my first year of college. I was a member of this insane organization called the Party of the Right at Yale, and it was very reactionary, and it was a way of being a youthful rebel in a very perverse way in 1971, and it didn't last. I got over that it was like a temporary affliction, and I got over it. But I'm sort of glad that I understand how those people think, at least. But then I was divided between majoring in economics and majoring in English. And I think when I gave up the conservative politics, I thought, oh, I'll be impractical and romantic and study literature. So I did that as a major, and then I went to graduate school in English. And then I got as far as writing a proposal for a dissertation, and I never wrote the dissertation. So, but I wasn't, as it turned out, I was not all that attracted by the idea of being an English professor. I didn't enjoy teaching that much. So I came to New York and worked in publishing and just sort of bounced around for a while. Didn't really know what I was going to do.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I read that like following your college years, you served as a secretary to the chair of a small Wall Street brokerage firm.
Yeah.
Led by a former Bell Labs physicist.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, he was very ahead of his time in the sense that he was bringing all these mathematical techniques, which he got from physics, to finance, which in those days was not really very widely practiced. And so he was a pioneer. And now, of course, Wall Street is just covered with this stuff, quant trading and all this business. But then it was novel. And he was a bit of a bohemian. He had Baudelaire in his desk drawer. And eventually drank himself to death, sadly. But I've just since I was like 14, I've been like fascinated by the world of the stock market and finance, and it's a real love-hate relationship, as is my relationship with like the ruling class, which is my topic of study now. It's just like I once admire them and hate them.
But so. At that time when you were working there, like what lessons did you gain from that period of your life?
Oh, I guess I one of the things I learned was it wasn't for me. So the firm went under. They had a customer who bought too much stock he couldn't pay for. Ooh. And so the firm went under. And so I decided, I think I'll go. And then I got a job as a librarian at a law school. Not a law school, rather, a law firm. And I said, this kind of stinks. I need to do something else. So then I decided to go to graduate school in English, and spent 3 years at the University of Virginia, and it was fun. But I didn't think the professor life was really what I was looking for. So I just had this very lazy, irresponsible life for several years until I got the idea of starting a newsletter.
Well, I have a question because at that time, when you were at the university, you studied critical theory?
Yeah, my main interests were poetry, American and British poetry, the 19th and 20th century, and then various forms of literary criticism and critical theory. Yeah. And
like right now, what are your current like reflections or perspective on critical theory?
Well, I still read the Frankfurt School sometimes. I was really deeply into psychoanalysis. I was going to do a dissertation analyzing narcissism in American poetry. And so I read a lot of the psychoanalytic literature on narcissism, which is a big deal at that time, late 70s, early 80s. And I still think a lot about that. I still very much think in psychoanalytic terms. And I'm doing that thing that goes way back to the early 20th century of trying to bring together Freud and Marx and some understanding of how things work, how the political structures of power then influence how we think at a very intimate, personal level.
And can you share a bit about your journey into economics and journalism, like before you started your newsletter?
Yeah, well, I took some economics courses in college, and so that's where I got what little academic grounding I have in the field. But I stopped and then just did English and 3 years of graduate English. And then I got the idea of writing a dissertation, and I was going to somehow tie the development of this narcissistic theme in American poetry, this mix of this grandiose imperial self with like a real inner lack and emptiness. But I was going to try tie that to the developments in the political economy. So from looking at Emerson, the early 19th century, small scale, localized competitive capitalism, moving on to the big, large scale, financially dominated capitalism of the 20th century, and what that did to the consciousness of these authors I was going to study. So that's how I brought together this economic and literary. And then I started, reading the economic stuff more carefully, which I hadn't looked at since I left college. And I thought, this is interesting. And I read this, I think it was Monopoly Capital by Byron and Sweezy. They said, the business press is really very informative. You can learn a lot about the real economy by reading the business press. You're not going to find it in the mainstream papers, because they're just written for a general audience, and they lie to people. They lie to the general audience. But you're going to get pretty much the unvarnished truth in the business press. So I said, that's interesting. So I started reading the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and I was persuaded. And I thought that this was a time, the 1980s, when Reaganism was dominant. It seemed like capitalism had won. Any kind of challenge to the rule of money just seemed hopelessly obsolete and weak. And so I was, in my little one-man party of resistance there, I thought that the left, such as it was at that time, didn't really pay enough attention. They're all like writing about theory and, debating fine points of Marxism. And I thought, maybe I could just provide some link between that, some theoretically, historically informed understanding, but with an engagement with the headlines of the moment.
Yeah.
And that was my project. So I started this newsletter. And as I started writing it, I realized I knew far less about what I was talking about than I thought I did. And then I signed this contract only a few years after I started the newsletter to write a book about Wall Street. And thought, I can do that in a few months. And then I realized, oh my God, no, I don't have the slightest idea what I'm talking about. So I spent 6 years doing it. It was almost like a self-directed graduate course in finance and economics.
Wow.
But yeah, that was development economists have this phrase, learning by doing. And that's what I did. I was just learning by doing.
It's so true. I feel like it's not taught enough in school to just learn by doing.
Yeah.
So then it's they want us to be kind of like assisted babies. But I agree with you. It was really inspiring to see that when you wrote the book, you took it as a challenge and you made, and I think, from what I read, the book was very influential. So what kind of feedback did you get out of that Wall Street?
It mostly got a lot of praise. It sold quite a few copies considering what it was, and got me a lot of attention. I used to know this guy who said, once you write a book, you're set. And I thought that was an exaggeration, but people do take you much more seriously, as a writer, if you've got a book to your name, especially when it was fairly substantial, 400 pages. So I felt like that established me to have a reputation. But, if I had known, if I'd understood how little I know when I started it, I wouldn't have done it. I was like, oh my God, I don't really know what I'm doing. But I just plunged into it, Keynes has a great quote about how nothing would ever be done if people just made rational evaluations of what.
Yeah, it's so true.
He's like, this is animal spirits, or is the phrase he used, that, just having the nerve to just plunge ahead, even if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with this point of view. And also, you authored numerous books, I think so far.
Four of them, yeah.
And I'm really curious to know more about your experience writing books versus publications.
Writing a book is a very different experience. Although my books have all gotten shorter as the time has gone on. But it's just, you have to keep so many more things in mind. How will this particular idea fit into this larger structure? If you're just writing an article, you might have one or two ideas, But if you're writing a book, you need to have many, many ideas and thread them together into some sort of coherent argument. So it's really hard to, sometimes you'll just like start, well, a little something or other, and then but then you realize, well, where is this going to go? How does this fit into the structure of the book? So, and it can really just take over your mind, because it's just all you can think about it. At a certain point in the composition it's the only thing that exists for you for a while. Even if you're not working on it, you're thinking about, oh my God, where will that go? Or, I need to address this or whatever. So I actually, after a long period of time, I've been thinking about writing a book on the American ruling class and its decay into an absolutely debased formation. I've been thinking about it for over a decade. And I've written some stuff, articles and things that are part of this project. But I never actually sat down and started writing it as a book. So I did that over the weekend.
Oh, nice.
So listen, I have this piece of software called Scrivener, which is really nice for writing books because you can write things in pieces and then move them around.
Wow.
But it also allows you to set up goals. So like, this is how many words I want to have written by such a time. It'll figure out this is what you need to do day by day, and it'll give you this nice progress bar if you're making progress towards your goal. So yeah, I set that all up, and I've been doing nicely so far. 2 days so far.
Nice.
But but I'm really, once again confronting that because I have a lot of material I've written in other essays and things like that, but I have to figure out how it all fits together into a single text. And in my radio show, I interview a lot of authors, a lot of book authors, and there's so many books that just shouldn't be more than a magazine article.
Yeah.
And they're just like, okay, you made your point. All right. The introduction really would have been enough. So I don't want to write something like that. I want to write something that, each page is worthwhile. But there's an awful lot of hot air in some of this stuff.
Yeah. And so have you thought of a publisher yet, or?
No, well, I've talked to a couple, and I need to talk to some more and find an agent. Yeah. And I know a couple of agents I'm going to try talking to, but it's, I haven't done this in some time. Three of my books are published by the same editor, publisher. He went from Verso to New Press to his own label now, Or Books. And so it was kind of easy. He had asked me to write the book. He asked me to write the book about Hillary Clinton.
Oh, yeah, my turn.
And I was like initially reluctant. I said, I just don't want to look like I'm obsessed with Hillary Clinton. Because I'd written this article for Harper's. It was a cover story in Harper's called Stop Hillary, which got written up on page 6 of the Post, which is like one of the highlights of my life. And then I thought, I don't know, it'd just be kind of weird. I don't want to be seem like I'm obsessed, and people accuse me of being a misogynist, and I don't want any part of that. But he persuaded me. We're good friends. I've known him for like over 30 years. So, but yeah, I haven't had really to find a publisher in that sense for a long time. So that'll be an adventure.
Yeah, but I'm sure, you're a legendary journalist, so I really cannot wait for the book, because I've seen so many videos where you're talking about the ruling class, and I think it's more important than ever right now at this moment to have those discussions, because at the end of the day, it all goes back to class.
Yeah.
With what we see all around the world, and especially the younger generation, I feel like they are craving that kind of knowledge and.
I think people don't really talk about it, and the processes of rule. I don't know. It'd be nice to think of a society in which there was no ruling class, there are no classes. We're all nicely cooperative and self-governing. We haven't seen one of those yet, and so the quality of the ruling class really does seem to matter a lot to a society, and ours is really just terrible. The whole Democratic Party wing of it is just out of ideas. I don't want to be ageist about it since I'm no youth myself, but the gerontocracy is just. But I think that's a symbol of the fact that there's just no freshness, there's no liveliness, there's nothing, no fresh ideas coming out of that crew. And then in the right wing side is they're plenty energized, but they're insanely dangerous, frightening. So it's a pretty grim situation at with some people who study these things called the political class, the people who like, not the big moneyed interests, but the people who like run the top machinery of government. They really seem very debased right now, and it's frightening. And to watch like Joe Biden, who sometimes doesn't even look like he knows where he is, enabling genocide in Gaza. It's just, I find it just deeply depressing and angry, angry making.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm really curious about like what kind of sources do you read every day, to get the news, like to get your information at the moment?
I still read a lot of the business press, Financial Times, Bloomberg. Read a lot of that stuff. I read the New York Times every day, get it delivered like an old person. One can learn stuff by reading the New York Times, but also can make you furious with all the nonsense it publishes. And you have to learn how to like excavate some truth out of all the ideology they layer on top of it. But I've been doing it for so long, I'm very practiced at reading the New York Times. But yeah, I read an awful lot of mainstream sources. But something like the Financial Times is written for the people who own and run the world, and I like to know what they're being told and what they tell each other.
And I would love to know more about like your what is leftism for you?
What is leftism for me?
Yeah, because in 1986 you started the newsletter Left Business Observer, and also like your current website is Left Business Observer.
Well, LBO -news, yes. Well, I mean, ultimately it's, I think it means some kind of socialism, but it's really hard to say exactly what one means by that. And I've been trying for many decades to figure that out. But to me, it means something, a society that's more peaceful and egalitarian and cooperative and not driven by competition and aggression. I resist what I think of as hippie sentiments, but I guess, underlying it is some kind of hippie sentiment of just more love and less hate would be really nice.
Yeah.
But like organizing the material side of life, like investing in things that will make people comfortable and healthy and stave off the dangers of climate change. And it's going to take very large scale interventions by the state to do these things. And, our government is not in any shape to do that sort of thing right now. It's just still organized around violence and accumulation. And I would like to see a society that's not organized around violence and accumulation.
In 1996, you started hosting the weekly radio show and podcast Behind the News. It was formerly produced by WBAI and now produced by KPFA, right?
Well, it was broadcast. The former program director at WBAI is the one who gave me the show. And then he died at a tragically young age. And so I took over. He did the show 4 nights a week. I don't know how he did it 4 nights a week. And he was a great radio talent. He just had this, Samori Marksman was his name, and he had this presence. He just like calm and knowledgeable and thoughtful, and he was just, I really admired him. The rest of the station was disaster, complete chaos. There was nobody anywhere near, or very few people of his level of talent. But I kept doing the show, and then I got into a fight with one of the program directors, and he tried to cut me back and put me in a really unfavorable time slot. But fortunately, the Pacifica affiliate in Berkeley had been running my show for a few years, and they said they'd continue to run it. So that's what I'd do it for them now.
Nice.
But Yeah, it is still very much a radio show, not like a podcast. It's very organized like a radio show with strict time limits and you know.
Yeah, that's what I love with your show, because it's straight to the point. Like it's very concise, and it captivates the listener attention because you always have like very interesting guests, and at the same time you have a music break, and I think that's like the recipe for like a good show.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah.
I mean, I sometimes worry that it's a little too formal.
No.
Formalized, because you know the dominant thing now is like people just sitting around talking, and I like sitting around talking plenty, but I don't see it's really a spectator sport. I don't understand why people think, you know, up to a point, yeah. I mean, if you're doing like, it's like late night TV talk show stuff, but yeah, I try to, I want to convey information in a way that's clear and entertaining to some degree, because the topics are not exactly entertaining or rarely are. But then I just like getting in my little musical interludes too, because I like music so much, and it's fun to share some of the things I like at the moment.
Yeah, it's very interesting to like link this aspect of your show with your childhood because of your mom. Like she introduced you to music.
Yeah.
And to see that like you're using that aspect currently.
Yeah, well, I studied, I played clarinet and saxophone for years.
Oh, wow.
And I did take some music history and music theory in college. Yeah, I took a music theory course in the same room that Paul Hindemith taught in. I thought that's pretty cool.
That's really cool. And I know that the intro song of your show, it features the theme.
It's the Kronos Quartet.
Yeah, it's
from
really
Pictures
nice.
of Africa. Yeah, that was I picked that up from Samori. That was his theme, and I kept it because I admired him, and it's a great theme.
Yeah, and it's so interesting, like to think of music as a signifier, like how when you just listen to the first 3 seconds, you know it's
Yeah. I have a listener who made an Instagram version of it. He's playing a guitar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I played that one week as the introductory music, but it's fun. It does seem to be my brand.
Yeah.
That theme, yes.
And have you got like some kind of feedback from like listeners? Like, do they write back to you? Or
Yeah, I mean it's not a torrent, but I do get regular emails.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes of praise, sometimes of criticism, and because KPFA is listener sponsored, we have to do fundraising. So we just came off a 3-week fundraiser, and so then, like, I have to beg for money, and then people will say nice things about the show. Then it's really nice to be praised. I enjoy that.
Yeah. But so how were you able to like host this show for so long? Because it started in 1996.
Yeah, I used to do it as live radio, and now it's all recorded. But live radio is it's a little scary. You're just afraid you're going to run out of things to say.
Yeah,
it happened to me twice when I was doing it live. It was really, and like 10 seconds seems like an eternity.
But how did you do like live interviews with like guests?
Either in the studio or on the phone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It used to be a lot of people, would come through New York on a book tour or something or other, and then I'd interview them then. But most of it was on the phone.
And also, you had so many amazing guests on the show, including Noam Chomsky and Yanis Varoufakis, Slavoj Zizek, Joseph Stiglitz. Like, how did you, like, can you elaborate on your experiences during the early years of the show? Like, how were you able to like interview guests like that?
Well, as with the writing stuff, I didn't really at first know what I was doing. Because Samori, I had been doing short 10-minute commentaries on his show. And then he would ask me to do guest interviews when he was either too busy or out of town, or it was an area he thought I knew more about than he did. So that was like my apprenticeship. But when I started doing it myself, I don't know, do I know what I'm doing? Yeah, it's, and then you just like, there's this term in psychoanalysis, the subject presumed to know, the analyst is the subject who's presumed to know everything, right? And so you as the radio host or the subject presumed to know everything, and like, do I really know? And, to ask good questions, you have to know something about the topic at hand. Otherwise you sound like, a naive. And I didn't want to sound that way. Sometimes it's funny. I sometimes have to like play dumb and ask questions because I know that people in the audience may have this question and I know the answer, but I don't want to. I don't want people to think I don't know this. But it took a long time to learn how to do it. And I'm not a confrontational interviewer. I don't like get hostile or like every now and then I have a cantankerous interview, but not that often. I just basically want to like, if it's an author or somebody with, an experience or an activist or something, I just want to know their story. Like, what's your argument? I will sometimes say, well, here's a problem with that and get them to respond, but I'm not going to do some kind of gotcha kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But, if I'm reading an author, interviewing an author, I have to read most of the book. I mean, I don't read every word of a book sometimes, but, you just have to know what you're talking about. And so it's a lot of work that goes on behind it. And then a lot of editing work goes into it too. But yeah, I think you just kind of learn how to do it, learning by doing again. Like, I don't know how I'd train somebody to do an interview, but you just sort of have to do it. And, my years doing like, I guess it's kind of an anachronism to call it print journalism, but, journalism, words on a page. I got used to interviewing people for that. But the interview for a radio show is more of a performance, and that's different from the kind of informational interview you might do for written journalism. And I can, edit out any pauses or mistakes or false starts or anything like that too.
Yeah, it's so inspiring to know that like you're doing everything yourself. You're a one man show. Like
it'd be nice to have a staff, but then I'm not. I'm such. I have a hard time. Like, well, no, that's not the way I would do it. So people. I know some of the more prominent podcasts have producers who, and then editors. People who handle the technical side. It'd be nice.
Yeah.
You have to learn how to do a little like sound correction stuff.
But so the show is now like it's not your full-time job. Like
no.
Yeah.
One of the ways I'm able to do this is that I inherited a newsletter for a friend of mine who died for the bond market. So it's writing up about the U.S. economy for people in the bond market. So I made, it's kind of fading now because of changes in the financial markets and whatever, but for a while I was able to subsidize the rest of my life with that.
Oh, wow, nice. And have you been also writing for publications like lately or?
Yeah, I mean, I write, I'm doing something for the Baffler soon. I write for Jacobin. It's fun to write for Harper, so I'd like to do that again. Yeah, but it's the world of journalism is just so different from when I started. You could not live well, but you could live on being a freelance journalist. You could maybe get a job in journalism, and now it's just very few people have jobs. It's just like, as a friend of mine put it, it's like the New York Times and then a bunch of guys with Substacks.
Yeah.
And, it makes me worried about like the practice of journalism, because for all the problems of the New York Times, they have some resources and they can send people to report something. And so much of journalism today is just guys sitting around opinionating without much in the way of like reporting or research. And that makes me worried that there's just the production and dissemination of knowledge is just the economic basis for that is getting undermined.
It's so true. And even the system of Substack, the patronage system is not really sustainable.
No, and well, they're like a small group of people who can make a lot of money doing it. But then it creates all these perverse incentives. You have to like be really sensational. You have to pander to all these right-wing prejudices. And it makes me worried that it just encourages some of the wrong things. But that's the world we live in now.
Yeah.
Now, Rupert Murdoch said in 1999, the internet will destroy more jobs than it creates.
Wow.
And I don't think that's literally true, but I think in retrospect, I think he said more businesses than it creates. But I think the destructive side of the internet, and I love the internet, I use it all the time. My life is very much organized around it. But, he had a point that it's destroyed a lot of things. It's destroyed a lot of industries. And I don't know what you find in music, but it seems like it used to be easier to be an independent musician than it is now too.
Yeah, actually, I'm really curious about your opinion on the music industry and economics.
Yeah, I don't really know that much about it. It just seems like, there's that classic Steve Albini, R.I.P., piece that he did in The Baffler in the 90s about, you get this advance and then the math, all the money disappears.
I read it, yeah.
So I don't want to get too romantic about the old days of doing music, but it seemed like it was easier to survive. I don't know about thrive, but at least survive as a kind of mid-level act, not Beyonce, but the credible performer with a following, and you could play clubs, get record deals. Now it just seems much, much harder. Everything is so polarized. There are some people who are just raking it in, and then everybody else is barely getting by. And it's especially true in creative fields. And I just, I worry that we're just turning into this Philistine society where culture is dying, and it's just harder and harder to think and perform, and anything beautiful is under siege. It's I don't want to get too lost in sadness, but it is sad.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, and that's why I think we need to amplify like right now, like people who are critical thinkers, and at the same time like adding people with humanity who are adding value to the world, because everything is getting decimated. But I'm curious about your opinion on this. I mean, we all feel hopeless and pessimistic, but how do you keep your optimism alive?
I don't know that I do. I mean, I do have a bit of it's funny, I do have a pessimistic temperament, but on the other hand, I just keep going. I try not to think too much about climate disaster. I mean, if you think about it, you're just paralyzed with anxiety and grief. And the level of violence, I guess, the level of violence in the world has always been fairly high, but I don't know, it just seems really grim now. The levels of material deprivation, we've always had material deprivation in the world too, but I don't know, there's just also so much wealth around. So it just, we could do so much better with what we have and what we know than what we do. And it's really, it's sad. It's very frustrating. And there's also just so much indifference or resignation. People don't really think. They wouldn't even say, "Oh, this is really bad, man." There's. So I don't know. It's hard to maintain a degree of optimism in this world. I guess I have some degree of functional optimism, enough to keep me going. But I could easily think myself into despair, but I guess I stop myself.
And I mean, when you see the current state of capitalism, would you agree on the concept of late stage capitalism?
I don't know, it struck me as a little optimistic. because it just keeps getting later and worse.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, that term,
Yeah.
I recently saw somebody tracing it back as far as the 1920s, I think.
Yeah,
But
me
it
too,
was, I think Ernest Mandel really made it famous in the 70s. And, that's 50 years ago. And it's not getting any, I guess it's getting later in the sense that, time has passed, but I don't know. It doesn't seem to be getting any close to, I mean, I think the people who invoke those kinds of formulas often think that, well, this won't last, so we'll take it over and make a decent society. And I have a hard time believing that, that if it's going to collapse in some dramatic way, it could be really ugly. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think Francis Ford Coppola has a new movie about this.
Oh, yeah, I know he has a new movie.
Megalopolis, I think.
Ah.
And apparently it had like a standing ovation at Cannes, the festival. And they struggled to find funding in the US. I think it was censored.
Francis Ford Coppola?
Yeah, and he funded it himself. Like
he's like one of the biggest movie makers of all time, and he couldn't find funding?
Yeah, and he said that he sold his, I don't know, he had land of something, I don't know, he sold the land, a piece of land.
Wow.
So maybe the concept of like the empire falling down is threatening, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I guess it's hard to get the empire to fund that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sounds like an interesting project.
And I'm really curious. Like, do you see any alternatives emerging?
Well, there are some favorable developments in American politics. The whole Bernie Sanders campaign, the growth of Democratic Socialists of America, the Squad, and all this. These are hopeful things. There's a lot of younger people really seem don't want to take it anymore, and sometimes they really inspire me. It was really inspiring to see these campus occupations, which I got to say, I was kind of surprised by them. I mean, the scope of them and the durability, that get busted and they just keep coming back. After these kids are impressive. So I really that's something hopeful. The loss of that kind of consensus in support of Israel in the U.S. It's a nice thing to see happening. Although the response to it has been very brutal. I mean, not just the campus beatdowns, but also like people losing their jobs and things over that. I have a good friend who's may lose her job, tenured professor, for having written an article that was too favorable to Hamas. And it's just, there's a lot of that sort of thing going around. But on the other hand, the reason that sort of thing is happening is because that consensus is slipping. So that's a good sign in some sense, although I hope she doesn't lose her job. But yeah, so that sort of thing is hopeful. A lot of younger people have ambitious ideas about how to transform the world, but there's also, I don't know, there's also this pessimism among younger people. Remember when I wrote this piece for the New Republic in 2019 about DSA, and I remember I asked the person actually kind of brought me into the organization. And I said, well, what are your long-term thoughts about where it should go? And she says, I don't think there is a long-term. And for somebody who wasn't yet 30, to be so in the grip of that kind of pessimism really made me worried. Like, young people, you're young, you're supposed to be hopeful. It's us grumpy old people are like supposed to say, no, oh my God, everything's going to hell. But that worries me, that sense of like, there's no future. My friend Steve Fraser had a long essay in Jacobin recently about the death of the future. And his argument is that like, people across the political spectrum are nostalgic, whether it's the Trump people nostalgic for the 50s, or like the DSA people who are nostalgic for the New Deal. Like there's just this absence of any kind of ambitious imagining even of a better future. People are just looking backwards, and that doesn't seem healthy. And also, I think American society is just kind of aging and rotting. And it was always a very brutal society from its founding. But there was an energy to it, and it produced a lot of great culture. I don't know, it just seems to be, maybe this is just my perspective, but it just seems to be losing a lot of that. And it's just more decadent than energetic.
Mm-hmm. And in your opinion, what are the most pressing economic issues that we're facing today?
Just so many people have no money. And, people even who are seem solvent, paying the bills, are just 1 or 2 paychecks away from disaster. Illness can just, it's not just when people get sick, it's not just the medical bills that cause them a problem, but the interruption of income.
Mm-hmm.
There's no social support in those sorts of situations. The economy by conventional measures is doing well, mostly, but people still feel really strained and stressed. Mm-hmm. This for all the alleged prosperity and I've lost track. What is it? $24 trillion of GDP now.
Whoa.
Just meeting basic needs is so hard, even for people who think they're pretty middle class. Mm-hmm. It's just everything seems. It's just so easy to fall down.
Yeah.
And so I saw the New York Times had this article the other day about kids at elite colleges who want to sell out because they feel social change is hopeless and getting by is so hard that they just want to make a lot of money. And, they'll probably, maybe if they do that, they can if they're coming out of some fancy college. But I can't imagine they'll be happy because of it.
Yeah. It's so true. It's like now I'm realizing what truly matters is people having real communities, but really real communities and support where people can help each other. And maybe we have to go back to the ancient time, and it's not ancient time, but where people truly cared about their neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, I live in a apartment building with 13 units, and I know and like some of my neighbors, but it's pretty alienating. And for people you see every day, you just like, hi. You don't know anything about their lives, really.
Yeah.
And, people who live around me, I might see them at the stores, get familiar faces on the sidewalk, but then it's also, I don't know whether this is some feature of American society or in particular, because, we do have this long history of individualism and competitiveness and all that business. So maybe other societies are less atomized and alienated than we are, but I don't know. We just seem to be in our own little bubbles.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
And what do you think of social media? Because I feel like right now it's, the amount of violence that we see, but it's like a mirror of what's going on in the world. And I think we need to see it, but at the same time, seeing that violence every day can impact,
Yeah. Wake up every morning and see, what did Israel bomb today? And that can wear you down. On the other hand, I can't stop myself from looking at it. Social media, I'm pretty active on it. And sometimes I worry that it's damaging. Both, all the stuff that you process, but also just the kinds of social relations that it encourages. People, so much of it is hostile.
Yeah.
Or you're just performing for the likes. And it's just, I don't know, there's something corrosive about it. But on the other hand, it does have some possibilities. It brings people together from around the world. I wouldn't know you if it weren't for that.
Yeah.
So you know what?
Yeah,
I don't know.
likewise.
So there are good things about it, but but having it in the control of these mega corporations that are using technology to manipulate us. And sometimes the technology seems very underdeveloped. And I was just looking at some of the ads I get on Instagram. I got an ad for an Italian restaurant in Hong Kong. and a weekly gathering of city workers in some town in Ohio. Like, you're not targeting me very well with all your fancy AI equipment. But yeah, that kind of manipulativeness is, very worrying. That, and they have nothing but making money and motivating them.
I want to go back quickly to Behind the News. I'm curious, do you have any memorable interviews or moments?
Well, it's funny, I often, I'll read a book and do an interview, and then a month later I go, what was that? That's the danger of doing it every week. As I forget them. But I think I've been very pleased with some of the stuff I've been doing lately.
Nice.
Some on Israel Palestine, but then the weakening of American power theme I like. But like I said, they sometimes just slip away. And I don't want to name any names because then everyone else will feel insulted.
It's true. But I encourage anyone who's watching or listening to dive into your archive, because all of your shows are in your website.
Yeah, going back to about 2000.
Yeah, and that's what's
I was a little spotty in the early ones, but when I first started doing it, I never recorded the show because I figured, it's just going off into the ether. It's a disposable product. And then I realized, actually, some of these are pretty good, so I should save them.
Nice. Yeah, I'm so glad you saved them. And also your book, Wall Street, is on your website.
Yeah, Verso let it go out of print, which annoyed me. But and then when the financial crisis hit in 2008, they offered me $1,000 to rewrite it. So Verso, you're cheap. But yes, I put it up for free download.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you are transparent, because you said the amount of copy you sold, and if people there is trust in your listener and audience, and if they people can donate, and I feel like we need more of that kind of trust, where people trust each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, it's like mutual support.
Yeah, mutual support.
Mutual aid. That's a nice. Until we can have a better society, we can improvise in that way.
Yeah, and finally, I'm gonna have two last questions because I don't want it to be too long. But what topics or issues are you most excited to explore in your work in the coming years?
Yeah, well, I want to actually write this ruling class book, so that's my front of mind, as they say. So that's something I'm really interested in. And then just an ongoing basis, the pathologies of the American political system, the role of American power in the world, and then climate, which is the crisis that stands over everything. And I just like I said, when I think about the climate crisis, I just sometimes despair. It's just getting people to care about it, and then you have a whole political party devoted to denying it. It's pretty dire. But I try to do my part in, and I think things can be done. I mean, it's not like we have to all go, live in caves again. But nobody wants to do it, or very few people want to do it. And then the level of denial and ignorance around it is really, really depressing.
Yeah, and that's why we need more people like you, in those seats. And I agree with you. Right now, with the trend of podcasters and people, I feel like there's so much noise that it's kind of clouding, what we should be. Knowledge,
Yeah.
In a way. And I'm curious, what guidance would you offer to young individuals aspiring to pursue careers in economics or journalism?
Ooh,
Sorry.
think about that again. No, because journalism is, I mean, economics, there are jobs to be had, you know, not so much in academia, but, you know, there are plenty of businesses that will hire economists. So that if you have a degree and all that business, you can probably have a career in that world. But journalism is just in such terrible shape now. But like I said, you know, if I'd thought about what I was doing, I probably wouldn't have done it. So there's always that, you know, if you have something you want to do, give it a try, you know. But it just seems, you know, my wife hates it when I say this, but, you know, there are times where I feel like I'm glad I'm not younger, because it just seems, it's a really tough time to be a young person. Like, the world is just hostile, and people scorn you. And it just seems like things are falling apart. And maybe people have always felt that way. I think that's probably true to some degree. We always exaggerate the crises of the present and think like nobody's ever lived through this before. And, you know, people got through the Black Death in the 14th century or 15th century. But yeah, just it's pretty hard. But give it a try, I guess. I feel like I don't want to sound like some sort of inspirational graduation speaker, but, you know, people with talent will probably do well if they really give it a try. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes, like, we put barriers ourselves in our minds.
Yeah.
And yeah, sometimes we just have to trust our instinct.
Yeah, don't think that you can't do something until you've tried it, you know?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you,
Luke, for this amazing interview. And yeah, I'll make sure to include all of the links. And also, when is your next show? It's
broadcast on Thursdays,
Thursday,
and then it goes. I put it up on the web late Thursday afternoon, New York time.
Yeah, well, make sure to include the next show.
Yes, it's going to be all about the U.S. Constitution. What a terrible thing it is.
Oh, wow. Nice. Well, yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.